And I believe the government then should pursue a twin-track policy, simultaneously trying to renegotiate so that we can take up President Tusk's offer that he made on the 7th of March this year of a Canada plus deal extended to the whole United Kingdom. But while we're doing that, in case they won't negotiate or those negotiations cannot be brought to a fruitful conclusion by the 29th of March, we simultaneously plan for WTO plus. Encouraging and persuading and informing businesses how they can prepare in the remaining months. Inviting the EU to coordinate their efforts and preparations for a no withdrawal agreement outcome with our own. Actually, they are much further advanced in those preparations than many imagine. And we should begin the process of novating or renegotiating the trade deals that we are party to as part of the European Union, where the European Union has free trade agreements, and we want to continue to trade freely with those countries. Switzerland accounts for 50% of our trade under those agreements. The agreement with Switzerland, as I understand from speaking to someone at the Swiss embassy a little while ago, well advanced. If I said, surely we could make some progress before we actually leave with this agreement. He said, but didn't you know we are? We have 8 work streams, 5 of them complete and 3 are nearly complete. I understand that agreement ought, according to the Swiss, to be complete before too long. That accounts for half the trade. Another 3 countries bring it up to 80% of the trade. That's South Korea, Turkey and Norway. Now, what are the pluses? Why is it WTO plus rather than just World Trade Organization terms? Well, first of all, we keep £39 billion to spend on our priorities to boost both our balance of payments and GDP. Those extra resources are equivalent to roughly 2% over our GDP over the next couple of years. Far from crashing out, we'd be cashing in. Secondly, it ends uncertainty. The agreement the Prime Minister has negotiated perpetuates uncertainty for another 2 years or more. Even if companies don't necessarily favour this particular outcome, and there'll be some who benefit more than others and so on, everybody, once they know, will get on and invest to deal with problems and take advantage of opportunities. That pent-up uncertainty will be released. Thirdly, it will force the European and Irish governments, both of whom, as I said, like the British government, have said that they would cope without erecting infrastructure and having checks on the border, to do precisely that. So the Irish border problem would solve itself. And that brings the 4th plus, of my 3 pluses, that we would be in a much better position, to negotiate a Canada-style free trade agreement with the EU. Once we're in charge of our own destiny and outside the customs union, we can abolish tariffs, particularly on goods we don't produce. Tariffs which force British consumers and businesses to subsidise inefficient producers on the continent. Instead, we'll be able to buy cheaper elsewhere, often from developing countries, helping them trade out of poverty. And we should start consulting now on what our tariff schedules should be, which we're going to eliminate, which we're going to reduce, and which we may want to keep. Secondly, of course, we'll be immediately able to negotiate trade deals with a range of countries who've indicated a willingness to do so. 90% of future trade growth, according to the European Commission's own trade portal, will be outside the EU. So that's where we should be looking for growth in future. And above all, and we often forget this, the real fruit is that we'll be able to streamline our regulation, maintaining high standards, but reducing the burden of compliance on our businesses and removing barriers to entry, which very often EU regulation imposes. So, although the media often portray the WTO option as something frightening and catastrophic, in fact, the WTO was designed to provide, and I know because I was, as Barry said, involved in the negotiations that set it up, it was designed to provide the basic framework within which countries would trade safely. Our trade with countries with which we trade solely on WTO terms has risen 3 times as fast as our trade with the single market since that was established. If we are on WTO terms, we will face the common external tariff when we trade with Europe. And of course, if we keep their tariffs, they'll face the same tariffs coming to us. Well, what will that mean? Our exports would incur some £5 to £6 billion of tariffs on them going to Europe. That's equivalent to an average tariff of about 4%, much less than the near 15% improvement in competitiveness which our exporters have enjoyed vis-à-vis Europe since the referendum because of the exchange rate movement over that period. So they'll still be, on average, considerably better off. It's also much less than our net membership fee of the European Union, which is 10 to 12 billion. Now, some people suggest it's worth paying to have access to the single market. But to pay 10 billion to save 5 billion does not strike me as a rational deal. And it's what we've been doing, or equivalent for the last 43 years. By contrast, if we apply the existing tariff to imports from the EU, they will have to pay not 5 or 6 billion, as we'll have to pay, but 13 billion. Why so much? 2 reasons. One, they export far more to us than we export to them. And secondly, the goods that they tend to export to us are the most protected, those which operate within the high tariff walls that Europe surrounds itself with, like motor cars, food, clothing, and so on. So we will be free to buy those goods more cheaply elsewhere. I hope we will reduce our tariffs. If we do slash our tariffs, be left with plenty of money to support those industries which will be, at least in the short term, hardest hit by facing European tariffs. It is bizarre to assume that we are going to put obstacles in the way of things we want coming into this country. We're not going to do so, we will not do so. In fact, we're not going to put any new obstacles in the way of anything coming into this country. That may be a surprise to you, but that is what the head of the Customs and Excise has repeatedly told select committees. It doesn't get reported by the BBC or others because it sort of doesn't tie in with their game plan. But the Customs and Excise only carry out physical checks if there's some reason to do so. And it identifies roughly 1% of all consignments coming into the country from outside the European Union as worthy of checks. In addition, there's sometimes direct intelligence which they get that they know about a particular smuggler or crook. What are we looking for? We're looking, above all, for drugs, for dutiable goods like tobacco and alcohol being smuggled into this country without paying that duty, and illegal immigrants. None of those will change. The riskiness of any consignment coming from the continent having an illegal immigrant abroad won't change. Having tobacco or cigarettes or alcohol won't change. So they do not anticipate any increase in the number of checks at our borders. So it is complete nonsense to suppose that there are going to be great hold-ups on stuff coming in. Now, what about stuff going out to through Calais to France and the continent? Well, first of all, a third of the lorries going back are empty, I hate to tell you, because we export so much less than we import. So there's not too much problem for them handling empty lorries coming back. But I've been looking at what our partners on the continent are planning to do. And they're taking very sensible and vigorous precautions. Going through the French Parliament at the moment, it's gone through the Senate, it's now with the National Assembly, is a piece of legislation which empowers the French government to take all necessary act. First of all, to secure the rights of British citizens in France. They're going ahead and doing it. Like I say, we should be doing conversely for European citizens here. But also to take all necessary action to ensure the smooth flow of goods and the rights of British firms established in France and their subsidiaries and so on. So they're taking all that necessary action. And the minister concerned, Gérald Darmanin, is going around saying we've got to do this, because if we don't, we'll lose trade to ports up the coast, Zeebrugge, Antwerp and Rotterdam. And the prefect for the Hauts-de-France region around Calais has said it would be economic suicide for them, deliberately or through lack of preparation, to allow bottlenecks to develop at Calais. So they're doing all they can. Indeed, the French government is acquiring a scanner which will be able to scan trains going into the tunnel when they're moving at 30 kilometres an hour. Now, what about aeroplanes? We heard an awful lot about aeroplanes not being allowed to fly. What you won't have heard, because you're reliant on the BBC and other people for your news, is that the European Commission issued a paper on the 13th of November, so obviously it's taken a little time to get through to the news desk, saying, regarding traffic rights, the Commission will propose measures to ensure that air carriers from the United Kingdom are allowed to fly over the territory of the European Union, make stops as well as land in the European Union and fly back to the United Kingdom. Those measures will be subject to condition that the United Kingdom applies equivalent measures to air carriers from the European Union. Very sensible measure. It's going to be resolved. So lots is happening, both on the continent and in this country, to ensure that no deal is not a problem.